We are now live on Facebook.
Great. Thanks so much. And with that, it is now 9:01 a.m. Hawaii time, and I will call this meeting of the Climate Change Commission to order. Haley, could you please assist us with roll call?
Yes, Chair Keener.
Present.
Vice Chair Allegado.
Present.
Commissioner Maynard.
Here.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Here.
And Commissioner Fletcher.
Commissioner Fletcher is not here today.
Yeah, we have 4 out of 5 commissioners present. The quorum is established.
Thank you, Haley. Next, given that no action is going to be taken on this additional agenda item, we'd like to add one agenda item into today's schedule that wasn't able to make it on the agenda being filed in time. And that is a presentation from Dr. Todd Bridges, who's a senior research scientist for environmental science with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And that would be a presentation today on their nature-based solutions program. And so that given no action will be taken on the additional agenda item, and this is standard language, it is not found to be of reasonably major importance affecting a significant number of people. And if others are in agreement, I would like to take a vote to amend the agenda to add Dr. Bridges' presentation as new agenda item number 5, following the CCSR report from Director Gonser. So can I get a motion to please adopt this amendment?
Motion to adopt the amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, and that is 4 ayes, and the motion is approved. So Dr. Bridges' presentation will be added to the meeting agenda. Thank you again for being here today, Dr. Bridges. And next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from May 17th, 2021. And I know those just went around. So have the other commissioners had time to review the meeting minutes? No? Haley, Rosie or Bettina? Have you had time to look over them?
I did just before this meeting.
Yeah, I just briefly looked over them before the meeting as well.
I have not been able to.
Okay,
No,
so
say we move to push it to the next meeting.
yeah, I second that. So all in favor of reviewing minutes next meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that is approved, and we will
I'm
review.
good. I told you.
Please make sure you're muted, everyone who's calling in. We will review the Monday, May 17th meeting minutes at our July Climate Change Commission meeting. All right. Next, agenda item number 4 is a report on activities of the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency from Director Gonser.
Thank you, Chair. Aloha, commissioners and folks tuning in to today's meeting. Matt Gonser, Director for the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and have a handful of subject area updates, starting with the Climate Action Plan. We're very pleased that on June the 2nd, City Council officially adopted the city's first ever Climate Action Plan. So this really launches us off into the work, right? It's one thing to adopt the plan and do all the work to prepare it. And thanks again to thousands of community members and working group participants, as well as our consultant and contract and research team at the University of Hawaii, both the Economic Research Organization and the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience. But Mayor is most excited about doing the work. And we're pleased to share that just last week, Wednesday, we had an official interdepartment kickoff with Mayor and the Managing Director to really set the stage for prioritizing the work moving ahead. And we additionally have department-specific work sessions scheduled through this month and into next month to really tee up what does several years of a work plan look like to effectuate and implement the actions identified in the climate action plan. So more to come on that. And we're very excited to be at this stage and really, carry forward some of the things that are already within this yet to be signed fiscal year 22 budget. But again, Mayor is very interested on implementation and execution. And as we get into really starting the discussions right away on a fiscal year 23 proposal to align all the priorities and make sure that the resources are there to support the work. Another thing that I wanted to share regarding climate action, this commission in the past had provided testimony on a variety of things related to the climate action plan last year. And you may recall what was then Bill 2, what ultimately became Ordinance 20-41. This related to parking reform. Just wanted to share some insights from a story that came out recently in the Star Advertiser regarding a proposal to replace a 13-stall surface parking lot within Waikiki for an infill development project. And as reported in that story, the project proponent shared that an amendment to the land use ordinance in December of last year removed some of Waikiki's parking requirements and created a pathway for this project to proceed. They could have moved forward with a hotel before the land use change, but they couldn't have moved forward with an apartment, which is something that they wanted to keep as an option. So this really shows the direct linkage between opportunities for infill, opportunities for improved community conditions, and not over requiring or requiring at all the overbuilding of parking stalls in our urban settings. So happy to share more anecdotes and successes as we progress on all the work. Related to climate resilience and equity, at the last meeting I shared that the office was launching and had started the city's first ever Equity Foundations workshop series. This week, Thursday, concludes 5 Thursdays in a row of this program developed and led by our office's Climate Resilience and Equity Program and the program manager, Lala Nuss, and terrific leadership from our AmeriCorps Vista Anna Mines, as well as some others. So we hope that this becomes a recurring offering within City DHR, Department of Human Resources training. And we're looking for ways to extend and really grow this program as a very important topic internally and externally for how we engage and continue to engage with community. And then around food security and sustainability, just wanted to highlight, though it was sort of just prior to his joining the team and then wrapping up as he was a member of our office, our food security and sustainability program manager, Dexter Kashida, was one of the direct contributors and participants in the final 2 parts of a Hawaii News Now, a Climate for Change series. And this really keys in on 2 aspects around food security, both disaster management and recovery and response, but also food systems, health, and economic opportunity. So just a plug, if you haven't seen at Hawaii News Now, they now have 4 segments for this series, and those final 2 elevating the food discussion are now out there. Since the last meeting, we, after having submitted a competitive application, received notification that we are now part of the National Association of Counties Economic Recovery Cohort. This was actually direct response to a story that myself and Office of Economic Revitalization Director Amy Asselby, we had done an early interview at the start of 2021, which then sort of sparked NACO, National Association of Counties, interest in some of the work that we had done through CARES last year, and seeing us as a strong partner and leader to contribute to something like this recovery cohort. So no specifics yet. We have our first kickoff next week, Friday, and we join 9 other counties, potentially 10 other counties from around the United States from all geographies and demographics and conditions. So we hope to share more information on that. And again, this is a partnership between us and OER. And then lastly, just wanted to tease, we have 2 new staff members joining before the end of this month. Starting next week, Monday, we officially have refilled the Energy Program Manager position. Some of you may recognize this name. His name is Ben Sullivan. He'll be joining us from the County of Kauai Economic Development Agency. He brings a whole wealth of experience both in architecture, design, and build. Many, many years ago, his experience with the KIUC as a member of the board, and then most recently, about a decade plus of working with the administration in Kauai through several mayors. And then we have offered, and it has been accepted, that a new office manager will be joining us. So you may remember Win Vong, who previously served in that role. You'll likely be interacting with this individual. It's not final yet, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but we're very excited to bring these additional staff members and rebuild the team a little bit. And then ultimately, as we transition with this new person, Haley Cook will be stepping back from her direct engagement with the commission, as this will become one of the responsibilities for the new office manager. So thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Director Gonser, and thank you, Haley, for stepping in and helping us do these commission meetings and help us through the last couple of months. I know it's been in addition to your regular duties, so it's been very well appreciated. Thank you. I had a question, Matt, about the NICO project. So that's really good news. Really interesting to hear that it came out of that. Do you know anything about like how climate is folding into the general, what's the climate focus of the recovery, or is it more general resilience and
yeah, that's really like our opportunity to bring those kinds of questions. The network itself is it's a technical assistance in kind award. Ultimately, the program itself is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as some others that support the National Association of Counties. We'll get a better sense of like the timeline, the workflow, the kinds of interactions that we have. But again, I think the opportunity is to define some specific challenges and needs to target as part of our recovery strategy. And it's a little bit TBD in terms of what we ultimately want to focus in on. So, I'll make sure to provide updates along the way in concert with Director Asselby.
Great. And do you know the other 9 or 10 counties that you'll be working with, kind of who they are?
Yeah, so they are, and apologies if I get some of the pronunciations incorrect here. Coconino County, Arizona, Hennepin County, Minnesota, Multnomah County, Oregon, Erie County, Pennsylvania, Palm Beach County, Florida, Kittitas County, Washington, and El Paso County, Texas.
Interesting. All right, great. Yeah, we'll be very interested to hear follow-ups on that. And great news about Ben joining the team as well. Are there other questions or follow-ups for Matt from the rest of the commission? All right, if there are no questions from the commission, are there any questions or comments for Director Gonser from the public? And to speak, you can either turn on your video and raise your hand, or you can raise your hand in the little virtual Zoom, or you can put a question in chat. And if you do have a question or comment, please identify yourself by first and last name for the record. I'm not seeing anything. All right, if there are no additional questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thanks for your update, Director Gonser.
Thank you.
Okay, the next agenda item is our added item that we voted on at the top of the meeting. And that is a presentation from Dr. Todd Bridges, who is the Senior Research Scientist for Environmental Science at the U.S. Army Engineering Research and Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He leads innovation in the areas of sustainable infrastructure and environmental management for the U.S. Army and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Todd is the national lead for the USACE Engineering with Nature initiative, which began in 2010 to advance the use of nature-based solutions through a combination of research, field application, and strategic communication. So Todd, thank you so much for being here today. And we're really excited to learn more about the Engineering with Nature program initiative and different projects and how it might be implemented in Hawaii and Vanuatu.
Thank you, Victoria. I assume you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you, we can see you, and you should be able to share your screen.
Doing so now. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep, we see your notes right now as well.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great.
Sometimes takes a moment. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. This is an important period of time, I think, to consider how we can leverage and recognize the value that nature provides as we seek to develop more resilience and more sustainability within our communities. I just start initially by stating maybe an obvious point that we've all come to really recognize quite tangibly this past year, that we live in a multi-hazard world. And none of us were expecting a year and a half ago to be embroiled within a worldwide pandemic. And it serves as a reminder that the flavor, the nature of the hazards that we confront in the modern world are quite diverse. And this slide I put together to kind of represent a part of that diversity. And climate change is changing the profile of these hazards that we experience in real time. And climate change, of course, includes risks related to flooding, but depending upon where you live in the world or in the United States, other risks, including drought and wildfire and environmental issues, also are influenced by these same kinds of processes. If you look at just the weather and climate related disasters that have affected the United States since 1980, there have been $285 billion plus events, weather or climate related events in the United States. And if you sum the total of those climate or weather related disasters in the United States, the total cost is more than $1.8 trillion in damage. And in addition to that, 14,000 people lost their lives related to those events. So it's real what happens to us, and in many respects, the danger and the impact associated with these events is growing. And we build a lot of infrastructure. We have, over the last 100+ years, built a lot of infrastructure in the United States to serve a whole variety of purposes, including to address these risks, which I've just outlined. And these numbers are impressive by any sort of measure that you could probably think of. But the other issue that is reflected in this is that we've used a lot of concrete, rock, aggregate, sand, brick, asphalt to construct this infrastructure. There was a paper published in Nature this past December that highlighted a milestone in the year 2020 for planet Earth. In 2020, these researchers, their analysis indicates we reached this milestone whereby the amount of human-made mass, largely in the form of these construction materials, now exceeds the total amount of all living biomass on planet Earth. And if you look at the graphic taken from this picture on the lower right, you can see the curve. In fact, the doubling time for human-made mass in the 20th century was 20 years. So every 20 years, we doubled the amount of human-made mass in the form of those materials on the planet. And the curve, I would submit to you, really kind of challenges the whole notion of sustainability. Maybe on a more positive frame, I would say, what will the infrastructure that we develop, the infrastructure solutions that we develop in the remainder of the 21st century, what will it look like? How will it operate? And significantly on the topic of what we're discussing now, how will nature be included as a part of the infrastructure solution? We started the Engineering with Nature initiative within the Army Corps of Engineers in 2010, so we've been at it for a little over a decade. The purpose of this was to work across the enterprise within the Corps and with our partners to identify ways in which we could bring together, if you will, partner or marry infrastructure engineering with nature itself to efficiently, sustainably deliver a whole range of value and benefits that we could provide. And the range of activities we've undertaken here is also quite diverse. It includes research, but also field application at both demonstration and full scale. There are many examples of this practice within the Corps of Engineers that go back decades, in fact, and a whole host of communication activities. We've published 2 books. You see them here in the middle of the screen, Engineering with Nature and Atlas. You can download PDFs of these books from our website. We started a podcast series last fall that continues into this year to be able to spark the dialogue about these kinds of opportunities. Just a couple of quick examples. A study after Hurricane Sandy identified that wetlands in the Northeast Atlantic seaboard provided $625 million worth of value in the form of averted flood damages. That is, damages that would have occurred had the wetlands not been there. A similar study was performed for the state of Florida with respect to mangroves. Florida has about 500,000 acres of mangroves around it, and those mangroves, in fact, are migrating north as we speak. And mangroves provide very tangible flood risk reduction benefits with respect to hurricanes. In fact, if this study group looked at one hurricane, Hurricane Irma, and for that one event, mangroves averted, prevented would be the colloquial way to say this, $1.5 billion in flood damages just from that one storm. 600,000 people live behind mangroves that saw less flooding during that one event. So it's a very impactful contribution that nature is making. And with respect to Hawaii, coral reefs. A recently published study has documented extensive amounts of value that are being contributed by coral reefs across the United States and U.S. Trust territories. There are over 3,000 kilometers of U.S. and U.S. Trust territory shorelines that have reefs, coral reefs along them. And annually, those reefs are providing more than $1.8 billion in flood risk reduction benefits. And you see the graphic up here from colleagues at UC Santa Cruz and the USGS identifying the annual flood risk reduction benefits associated with reefs around the island of Oahu. So very tangible benefits just in respect to flood risks. I could show similar kinds of benefits for other types of hazards. Nature-based solutions can provide a whole diverse range of benefits, including engineering and economic benefits that we more maybe traditionally associate with infrastructure investment, but also environmental benefits and social benefits, even including things so tangible and practical as human health benefits that come from contact between people and nature and spending time in nature. And time prevents going into much detail about this, but it's one of the goals of the Engineering with Nature initiative is to identify and in fact quantify and substantiate the kind of benefits that come from these kinds of projects. When thinking about these kinds of solutions, these kinds of integrated solutions, it's important to take a systems view. And here we've got the headwaters all the way down to the coast. And there are a whole number of ways in which interventions can be crafted that combine conventional and nature-based engineering to address hazards as well as to create additional value in the landscape. When thinking about flood risks, one of the ways I've tried to express this for some audiences that there really are 3 kinds of strategies. There's the hold the line strategy as sea levels rise and as flooding and storms reach us, we hold the line. And lots of times to hold the line means developing kind of hard solutions like the Galveston seawall. Retreat is an option. That is where you move away from the water. And I'll show a couple of examples of that. And then the third option is actually advancing. That is creating new wetlands mangroves or islands or reefs, depending upon the geographic context, to address the hazard, to buy time for adaptation, and there are a whole range of examples for that, and I'll just show a couple of them. So in regards to looking up into the kind of the headwaters with regard to flooding generated by rainfall, which is increasingly intensifying the amount of and intensity of these downpours, the UK has been using a whole variety of approaches, including developing retention and detention areas and the headwaters, reforestation programs, and also on the right-hand side here, showing what they call leaky dams. Made of wood, where they're spreading out the flow. Hydrologists talk about desynchronizing the flow. So not all of the water is ending up in the river, at the village, the city, or the town at the same time. So delaying its movement across the landscape in order to reduce its buildup and the flooding that results from that. Another example would be what in the Corps of Engineers we might call a levee setback. Others would refer to it as a floodplain restoration. That is, we're actually giving land back to Mother Nature that we initially took from her. On the left, you see with the red line, the original kind of levee line right up next to the river. And on the right, you saw the realignment of the levee setback, where it was pulled back away from the levee. In fact, I think here almost 70 acres of floodplain was restored, providing more space for water, which lowers the flood stage to provide tangible flood risk management benefits. Another example would be in San Francisco Bay, where over the last 150 years, there's been probably a 95% loss of natural wetlands in San Francisco Bay due to development largely, and levee and dike construction around the bay. These are two projects. Hamilton Army Airfield is a Corps of Engineers project, and Sonoma Land Trust is an NGO, their own project, where 500 and 1,000 acres of former tidal wetland is being returned back to nature by breaching levees and dikes and allowing them to be tidally inundated, providing an additional buffer against sea level rise and flooding. Here's an example of a kind of an advanced strategy. Fort Pierce City Marina in Florida was seriously damaged. I think it was by Hurricane Francis in the early 2000s. They needed a new storm protection feature. They could have designed and built a rubble mound breakwater with rock, which you've probably all seen or experienced personally, but instead they built essentially an island archipelago using sediment, which they had planted with mangroves and seagrass and restored oyster in order to create essentially a restored ecosystem that also provides flood risk management benefits, storm management benefits. On a larger scale, with respect to the Department of Defense, Tyndall Air Force Base was very seriously damaged by Hurricane Michael in 2018, such that now a $5 billion investment is being made to rebuild that base and to rebuild it in a more resilient condition or state. And I'm happy to say that Engineering with Nature is working with the Air Force and with its private sector partners to identify ways in which investment in the natural landscape, and they have a beautifully complex and diverse natural landscape that includes islands and beaches and dunes and wetlands and seagrass and oyster reefs, how investment in that natural landscape can develop additional resilience value for the mission and for national security. The Department of Defense is increasingly recognizing the value of this for its missions and purposes. In fact, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, more famously known for a lot of gee-whiz technology, is actually investing in reefs as resilience features. Up to a $50 million investment is going to be made by DARPA over the next 5 years in oyster and coral reefs, the combination of engineering with biology to reduce the damages associated with coastal storms. And I'm happy to say the organization that I work for, the Engineer Research and Development Center, is supporting and working with DARPA in this effort. Also, the U.S. Coastal Reef Task Force is focused on this. The Coral Reef Task Force was established in 1998, and there's a working group within the task force that's focused on restoration and intervention, specifically how to identify sites and scope projects and to further develop those projects to invest in reef restoration to provide these kinds of tangible resilience benefits and value. And I'd be happy to connect you with members of that task force after today. Engineering with Nature has also been leading a 5-year effort with dozens of organizations around the country, more than 70 contributing organizations from 10 countries, 170 authors and contributors, to develop an international guide on the use of essentially nature-based solutions for flood risk management. This is a 1,000-page guide. It's not going to answer every question, but I think 1,000 pages of reasonable initial investment in the details of how to develop, plan, think about, pursue the engineering of these kinds of strategies. And we're addressing general kinds of material like thinking about performance and benefits evaluation, coastal applications, as well as riverine or fluvial applications of these kinds of strategies. This document's going to be released this summer. We're in the process of planning an international virtual launch event. There are a lot of potential benefits associated with nature-based solutions. There's always a context, there's always a constraint, but organizations like the World Bank are investing in these kinds of solutions around the world. That's their guide in the lower middle. The World Bank is annually investing about $1 billion around the world in nature-based solutions to address just the kinds of risks we've been talking about here. But whether you're concerned about project delivery and making sure projects are done on time and on schedule, or you're concerned about diversifying benefits or regulatory efficiency, there are hooks that I think make nature-based solutions palatable, not just palatable actually, but attractive to pursue and consider. This is the last slide. There are a whole spectrum of answers and ways of thinking about solutions. We've done a lot of engineering in the landscape, people have, over the last 100 years or so. And we've got in the distant past sort of the condition I've called here wild and free-flowing nature, and maybe now in the minds of some we have sort of tamed and conquered nature, but obviously nature reminds us frequently that she cannot be conquered. But if we're seeking more kind of balance or a new balance between nature and engineering, what's going to be involved in delivering that? Well, as I say here, a 21st century vision for what water infrastructure is, policy to implement that vision, modernize approaches for how we actually engage communities and stakeholders about what they want, what they need, comprehensive approaches for evaluating the benefits from such projects. And we do need incremental development of engineering guidance to help guide technical practice. So with that, I conclude, and subject to the availability of time, happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridges. There are a lot of great examples that you gave in there. Let me open up questions and comments first to the other commissioners, especially in consideration of, looking at different implementation kinds of projects and ideas within City and County of Honolulu itself, but also open to the rest of the presentation.
If I may.
Bettina, go ahead.
Dr. Bridges, this was incredibly interesting, and I thank you for the time you spent presenting to us. So thank you very much. Given that we are an island state, and based on what you have seen around the nation, what is one of those low-hanging fruits, so to speak, where you say, here is something that you could do? I don't know how fair of a question this is, but I want to keep it broad, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and the challenges that confront island states or island nations, whether you're in the Caribbean or you're in Hawaii or you're in the South Pacific, someplace, there's an intensity there. Space is a premium, and that's why I included that one slide about the option of advancing. Mm-hmm. And there are challenges with this, I understand. And one of the challenges that we have to deal with is we need to open up conversations with with regulatory and resource agencies and engineering organizations and companies so that we figure out solutions that are, that are tuned to the 21st century challenge. When most of the environmental legislation and regulations that govern what we do in the United States were formed now 50 years ago, we really weren't confronting the challenges that we're sitting with today. It was contamination and pollution. Of course, we have those, but climate change and the nature of these multi-hazards that we deal with were really not foremost in our attention. And so there's a need to think again about what is the ethical, responsible, moral, environmental management when maybe we actually need new landscapes. We need to foster new landscapes because the system is on its own trajectory, whether we intervene or not. Mother Nature, with our help, is taking it to another place with respect to sea level rise. So that's one, is just dialogue about what these new solutions might include, being open to those new ways of thinking. And it's going to take a lot of dialogue to make progress. So that's a low-hanging fruit, to start having the discussion and not hopefully take things off of the table too early in that process of what solutions might look like for the changes that island states and countries confront.
I appreciate your response. Thank you very much.
And more about the Engineering with Nature program in general. So I think I saw in your bio, maybe I read that the program was stood up in 2010. Is that right?
Yes.
So how does the EWN program integrate into the larger kind of USACE list of projects, and is this a completely separate program, or how does it integrate into all of the things that USACE is doing, and how are those principles being applied across the larger core?
Yeah, we could spend probably half a day discussing how does the core work, and I'm happy that several of my colleagues from the Honolulu district as well as the Pacific Ocean Division are on the call with us today, and they may have something to offer here. But we have a lot of projects underway, and we have a lot of authorities that allow us to engage in problems related to water around the country. The Engineering with Nature program, as all programs within the core are, they are separately funded. But what we're doing within the Engineering with Nature program is we're working with our flood risk management team and programs, and our navigation program team and programs, and our water operations folks. We have 500 reservoirs in the Corps of Engineers that have to be managed, and looking for opportunities in which we can contribute maybe some new ideas and innovations, and help teams incorporate these kinds of approaches into their projects. And as I said, there are always constraints, but there are always opportunities to do things differently. And so that's what we're doing. And so we're working with project teams that are actually building projects all across the country, by invitation from those teams, of course, to identify these kinds of opportunities around the country. There are a number of examples I could give, but that's the general answer. Those two atlases that I showed, those two books, there are 118 projects from around the world presented in a coffee table type format that illustrate what Engineering with Nature looks like in constructed projects. 50 of those 118 are Corps of Engineers projects. So these projects have been built, they are being built, and what we're trying to do is gain the lessons learned from all that experience and share it across our enterprise, so from my perspective, so that the Corps of Engineers can do more of those kinds of projects in the future.
Thanks for that. Are there other questions from the commissioners? Uh-oh, I'm getting notes that my internet connection is unstable, so I'm going to go off video for a minute. Nope. All right.
You sound okay to me.
If there are no more questions from the commissioners, I'll open to questions and comments from the public, from other members of CCSR who may be present. And again, please identify yourself. You can throw a question in the chat. You can unmute yourself and introduce yourself, or I see Matt and then Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Dr. Bridges, for the discussion here. You know, sort of piggybacking from Commissioner Maynard's question, when there's space, get them and use them. Obviously, in a urban setting or in a lot of our just generally short and truncated watershed, space is at a premium. So I was wondering if you had just any other inclinations as to how the Corps is trying to position itself to engage the local partners and the non-federal partners in thinking about, you know, even if it's not the direct systems that the Corps can invest in, to think about components of projects across the landscape, how to bridge that as part of discussions on broader watershed management or stormwater management strategies.
Yeah, and, you know, Matt, we do have, there's one particular authority studies that in particular are, as I understand that authority, are intended to get at the kinds of questions that you're posing, you know, taking a more systems view of the watershed and understanding that with the non-federal sponsor and others. But Hawaii, Puerto Rico, other places, you know, where space is an issue. But there are other similar places on the mainland that have similar kinds of problems. One I would point out, the state of West Virginia, lots of very steep grades, narrow valleys that receive water very quickly. So there are some general challenges that exist. I guess my response to your question would be back on this idea of dialogue. I think we need more dialogue, especially across the federal government to the state and the local government, about the importance of space. Any kind of solution of an engineering variety is going to require space. And the fact that maybe we haven't confronted some of the challenges regarding land management and space has cornered us, in a sense, to a certain type of solution, for example, that doesn't require a lot of space, like a wall. If you want to incorporate more natural systems into engineering solutions, you have to have the space to do that. So that's what I would say. I mean, I think there's much room for more dialogue and engagement interaction across the spectrum of federal, state, and local government about the importance of space as a part of climate change adaptation. Because if you don't have it, or you're not willing to give some of it for adaptation, that severely constrains your solution set.
Hey, if I could interject, this is Brian Kamisato. I am the Director of Regional Business here for the Corps of Engineers, locally here at Fort Shafter. I want to introduce, in sort of the spirit of having more dialogue, right? I want to introduce some of our senior leaders from our Honolulu district who are online, because I think that's where a good place to start with this dialogue. And we can definitely bring in Dr. Bridges and his team to have more dialogue. But our Honolulu district has a responsibility for the islands here in the state of Hawaii, as well as other island nations throughout the Pacific. And so I believe, you know, that dialogue and starting to look for solutions, right, to these really tough challenges that we face coming at us. I think it all starts with dialogue. And so I agree with you, Todd. So I guess I want to call on either Jennifer Moore, who is our Deputy District Engineer for Programs and Project Management at the Honolulu District, or Todd Barnes, another Todd. But Todd Barnes is our Chief of Engineering and Construction at the Honolulu District. Both I saw them before on the call, but I guess I'll turn it over to Jennifer. Over to you, Jennifer.
Hey, Mr. Comisato. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Bridges. Jennifer Moore, civilian at Honolulu District. I'm a deputy district engineer. So many of the things the district is right now. So climate change, preparedness, and resiliency is a huge focus of ours. It's in our O plan. We are meeting with the city and county regularly. And I'll turn it over to Todd Barnes. He's our Chief of Engineering and Construction. And his technical team can talk a little bit more about specific projects, perhaps, if you're interested, that we can expand on. So nice to meet you. Thanks, Brian.
This is Todd Barnes. I'm having terrible connection problems, so I'm only catching bits and pieces of the conversations. And I don't know if you can hear my speaking, but we have a couple other of our coastal engineers, our climate preparedness and resilience experts, Jessica Podosky and Justin Gu, in our what's called our Civil Works Technical Branch. So they're both on the line, and maybe they can chime in just briefly. Over.
Sure. Hi, this is Justin Gu. I'm the chief of our Civil Works Technical Branch here at the Honolulu District. So, so we are looking at climate change and resilience, and it's something that we have to consider in each of our projects as far as sea level rise, and at least qualitatively looking at future hydrologic effects due to climate change. So it's something that we look at through our planning process in all of our projects. And we've also been involved in some climate change vulnerability studies, particularly in American Samoa, with looking at how future climate change may affect critical transportation assets. So it's something that we're actively involved in, and we're starting to kind of go through the process. And I think, at least with engineering with nature, I think, as Todd had mentioned, I think we're still working on getting better engineering, better guidance for how to actually design these things. And so I think it's a work in progress, but we are looking at it and implementing it for projects that we have ongoing. And then I guess, Jessica, if you want to add anything onto that.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Podosky. I'm a coastal engineer here at Honolulu District as well, and work a lot on climate preparedness and resilience. And I would just add, engineering with nature is a program, kind of as Todd said, that is spread wide across the Corps. So we really use it even as far back as our feasibility studies to evaluate, when we're looking at engineering designs, is there an opportunity to integrate some nature-based solutions from the beginning steps of planning, if we're able to, and also in our operations and maintenance. One example of that that some of you may be familiar with or you've heard about is our Haleiwa Harbor beneficial use program. So we're working really hard with the state and the city and county to potentially use dredge material from Haleiwa Harbor and put it over on Haleiwa Beach Park as a softer solution in front of the comfort station there, rather than keep reinforcing the same seawall. We have dredge material there that we think is good quality. So that's just kind of one example of, we're always looking for those opportunities in our projects where we can kind of improve them and do them better. But I'm happy to talk to you guys more about that as needed. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica and Justin and Todd and Jennifer and Brian and the whole Honolulu USACE team for coming out in force today. And we will definitely be interested in getting more involved and talking with you guys as we go forward, especially as we get into these more, as Director Gonser was talking about, more of these implementation studies following on the release of the CAP recently. And Jessica, it's nice to hear your voice, because I think we had been talking before about the USACE American Samoa report, and we had used some of that information in a recent report that we just put out for American Samoa. So great to see you here. I also realized that Nancy has had her hand patiently raised all this time. So why don't we go over to Nancy?
Aloha. Actually, you answered a lot of my questions, so I really appreciate this discussion, but I just wanted to let the Army Corps folks know, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, that, you know, we're interested, DHHL is interested in some examples, again, for shoreline erosion and inundation with flash flooding in a steep watershed, including wetlands restoration, like a really holistic approach. Who should we contact to initiate that discussion? It isn't just on Oahu. A lot of these are on other islands, but in many cases, you know, we're the landowner. We could do the entire thing. We had some work done by the Corps on Molokai in the 70s, but it was a very hard solution and it wasn't implemented. So, you know, we're really looking at more nature-based solutions to deal with all these problems, but we have a lot of situations where the coastal erosion and inundation is meeting the flash flooding, and our homesteaders are right in the middle of that. So we really need to think outside the box, and this is very exciting. So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and yes, I would like the slides. So looking forward to connecting with the Army Corps and having some discussions about dealing with these issues in a holistic, nature-based way. So mahalo. Oh, did you have any specific examples for these steep watersheds besides West Virginia, something that might include the shoreline?
Well, I guess one of the things I would point you to, Scotland has developed its own nature-based flood risk management guide, and Scotland has a lot of steep slopes. In fact, we were able to visit some of their projects, and it's not a you know, like a one and done solution. You know, they're literally intervening all along the watershed. You know, basically the strategy, nature-based strategies, is to slow and spread out the flow. That's what all of it's intended to do. And Scotland is also very aggressively pursuing a reforestation program, because one of the things that complicates it, there's been a lot of deforestation in Scotland over the years, over the centuries, and so they're suffering the ill effects of that now because the water just runs off of the land like crazy. So that's one guide I could point you to, and we're continuing our dialogue now with West Virginia kind of context, because those situations occur all around the world, and as well as in Hawaii, those steep slope, narrow valley kinds of problems. So.
Thanks, Todd. So there are a couple people in the chat who are asking for both Dr. Bridges' contact info and slides, which will be on the meeting website, and Haley posted that, but also the Honolulu USACE team contact info as well. So if there's like a central contact that we should send people to, it would be great to throw it in the chat there. And I'm not sure if anyone from the Honolulu team had a response to Nancy as well.
Hey there, this is Jennifer Moore. Thanks, Nancy. I grabbed your email address and I'll send you a note. And I'll also put my contact information in the chat as well. And so we can follow up with specific questions.
Great.
This is Brian Kamisato again. From where I sit, right, there's opportunity here, as you all know, probably, that, you know, we have some authorities that we perform work under for what we call civil works, right? So water resources across the US, whether it's flood risk management, whether it's navigation, whether it's sort of ecosystem restoration, just a bunch of different authorities. And, you know, and if we can find sort of partners with city or states, or even others, we can enter into feasibility studies to see if there's a federal interest in doing something that is of benefit to the local community. And so, that's our process, right? We study things, find an interest, the federal interest in it, sort of weighing cost against benefit. And if there's an interest and we can get it into sort of budgets, the federal budget side, we can bring some potentially federal dollars to bear to try and help you solve problems, right? So that's sort of the mechanics of how we can partner together on projects. But as we try to figure out the solutions to the problems, right, that's where I think engineering with nature comes in, right? So it's those approaches to solving problems that we can bring in these nature-based solutions that really, I think, kind of gives us a double whammy on this thing, and just tremendous benefit all around. So, Jennifer will explain all of that. I think our Honolulu district and Dr. Bridges' team, they're connected very well. So we can bring to bear all that the Corps has to you all. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the public or other CCSR reps or anything else from the commissioners? All right, I'm not seeing anything. All right, so with that, Dr. Bridges, thank you again so much for your really insightful presentation today and taking the time. We look forward to working with you and continuing in the future and integrating kind of those concepts into local work more and more, and figuring out how to better partner. So thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here with my colleagues with the Corps. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, next on the agenda is communications and correspondence from the public. And Haley, I believe there was one piece of correspondence. Is that correct?
Yes, there was one new piece of correspondence that came in through email. It's from Svea Breckberg with some statistics on the Hawaii's public school hurricane shelters. I believe it was generally just some information for awareness and resharing and re-extending where appropriate, but she did additionally add, and I'll say she asserts in her communication here that Oahu does not have enough or sufficient number of safe, protected public school hurricane shelter spaces. And she did add that the information may be helpful here. I'm trying to find it. I lost it. There was a small ask in the communication, but this has been shared with the, here we go. It says the statistics may help you decide to vote for HIEMA's request for hurricane shelter retrofitting funding. So I'm not sure if that's something that the commission has done before, or that she doesn't give any specific details on that, but the communication has been shared for your information.
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you for that, Haley. And did the other commissioners have a chance to review that piece of correspondence that was sent out? I don't know about the commission's role in being able to vote for HIEMA's requests. I don't know how that would work. I'm not sure if either Haley or if Courtney is on here, how that would possibly look, just as a general point of kind of commission action.
I'm not sure, but it may be something that you request more information from the correspondent on specifically what request she's referring to.
Yeah, now that I look at this, it looks like it's a forwarded message that was sent to a bunch of state officials, and then so she might have been asking for their vote, and then this was a forward in a place where we don't have that type of jurisdiction, but yeah, definitely a topic of that is of very that's of interest to all of Hawaii, including Oahu, and looking at different hurricane shelters and resilience centers and things like that. So we can look this over later. Were there any comments from the commission on the letter from Svea?
Only that it does cover a very important topic. It was also unclear to me sort of how do we as a commission move on that, but in terms of information raising, I think it is a very important topic.
Yeah, and it seems like this does come up, in hurricane season almost every year as we start looking at shelters and the different sorts of statistics of what different shelters, what types of winds different shelters can handle across the state. So yeah, definitely something of interest and of importance that we should look more into. So thank you for that piece of correspondence. Are there any comments on hurricane shelter statistics from the public? Okay. If there are no more comments on that, then we can go on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion on the climate change and construction industry guidance document. So this will just be a brief update. I can turn it over to Bettina for kind of a brief update of where we are on the way forward.
Thank you very much. This is a very brief update. We are excited that our stakeholder meetings have been completed. It was, I maybe speak for myself, but it was very worthwhile. We appreciate everybody's feedback. We also followed up with a survey in which we asked the same questions that we posed to the about 20 people that were in the live, if you will, stakeholders discussions. And the benefit of that was we were able to reach much more people and gave a lot of people out there the opportunity to give their feedback. We have received those responses. We have worked through them, and we are currently in the process of incorporating that feedback into our guidance paper. So stay tuned. Hopefully at the next meeting, we will have a somewhat close to final draft of said paper to present. That's it.
Thanks, Bettina. Yeah, as Bettina said, we had hoped to have something ready for this meeting, but there were a lot of really good comments and suggestions that came in through both the stakeholder meeting and the survey that we're addressing throughout the document, including doing more research, adding more sections, and it happened to coincide with the passing of the climate action plan. So we're adding some ways in which this document will relate to the findings and suggestions in the climate action plan as well, to make it more relevant to moving forward. So with that, are there any questions about the status of the paper from the commission? Are there any comments or questions from the public? I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything in the chat. All right, if there are no more comments or questions on the construction guidance document, thanks for that update, Bettina, and we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion and action on the election of the chair and vice chair of the commission. So I am sad to announce that my term as the chair of the commission is up at the end of this month. And so as one of my last duties as the chair of the commission, I'll be conducting the election of the Climate Change Commission's chair and vice chair, who will serve from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. So just to go over some of the duties, the first position that we will be having an election on is that of the chair. The chair is the spokesperson and representative of the commission. And some of the duties of chair involve serving as a spokesperson and representative of the commission, preparing the agenda, reviewing the draft minutes before distribution to the members and availability to the public, open all meetings of the commission at the appointed time, call it to order, maintain order and proper decorum with the assistance of commission members, announce the business before the commission, receive and submit appropriate matters before the commission, to call for votes and to announce the results, and to receive and present or report all communications to the commission. So given that, are there any nominations for the position of chair?
Well, he's not here, but can we, sorry, Rosie, can we nominate Chip?
That is exactly what I was going to say. I second that nomination.
So
Work in his absence.
yeah, so I did check the legal issues associated with that. So we can still nominate and vote in Chip if we want, who was unable to be here today because of a last minute situation, but he can't fully accept it until we meet in public in the July meeting. So we could vote, and if it passes with a majority of the vote that we elect him as chair, he could officially accept next time.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. Are there any further nominations for chair other than Chip Fletcher? All right, if there are no further nominations for chair, then the nomination is closed. Would anyone, given Chip's absence, like to say anything for Chip's behalf? I'll just say that I also am in support and think that he will be a great chair and a great resource for the city. If there's no more comments, sorry, looking at what I need to say. Since there is no more discussion and only one nominee of Chip Fletcher, Chip is elected as chair by unanimous consent if there are no objections. And then I now yield the virtual Zoom gavel, which I have never gotten to hold this entire year, to the new chair, pending his acceptance in the subsequent meeting in July. So congratulations, pending acceptance, to Dr. Fletcher. The next position that we'll be voting on is that of the vice chair. The duties of the vice chair of the commission are to assist the chair with conducting meetings and the administration of the commission's activities, to serve as the presiding officer and perform all duties in the absence or disability of the chair, and to assist the chair with the maintenance of records of the commission's proceedings. Are there any nominations for the position of vice chair? I would like to nominate Rosie Allegato to continue her work as vice chair of the commission.
I support that nomination.
Rosie, would you like to make any comments?
No, I accept the nomination if my other commissioners support that.
Looks like we are in support and there's only one nominee. Since there's no more discussion and only one nominee, Rosie Allegato is elected as vice chair by unanimous consent if there are no objections. Congratulations, Rosie. You are continuing as vice chair for the next year. And I think that is all we have to do to make it official. Haley, did I forget anything? Great. Are there any other comments from either the commissioners or the public on this particular agenda item? All right. Oh, I actually see in the chat there's a comment on the previous, from the communications and correspondence from the public, from Mike Plowman, who would like to state that he shares a deep concern for the survivability of the hurricane shelters. When the Cat 3 and 4 storm surge evacuation maps are sobering, and it appears there are no shelters which can withstand such storms on the Eva Plain. Publicly funded buildings should have a dual role as hurricane shelters. Thanks for that comment, Mike. So on our next agenda item is, oh, I put this on, so since my term is finishing up this month, I wanted to kind of precede ideas for topics for the commission to look into in more detail in this coming year. Of course, we do respond to requests from CCSR or the mayor or city council into specific topic areas that they are requesting information on. But if there are other deep areas of interest that the commission would like to propose for focus areas for work that we can then pass on to Chip pending his acceptance and Rosie for the next year. So I'll open it up now to discussion with the commission. Are there ideas for topics of interest that you'd like to see us look into more in the following year?
I was actually not, Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot maybe. I was actually really hoping to hear a little bit from CCSR in terms of looking forward at their work stream and needs, and if there are sort of research and, you know, expertise that the commission could bring to bear that would be very valuable in the next year, to be able to look forward with that. So would you mind giving a few comments there, Matt?
Yeah, no, thank you, Commissioner Kaufman. A lot of it still is in regards to current work streams and things that you're generally familiar with. A project that probably we haven't discussed for a couple of meetings at this point is Climate Ready Oahu, which is the climate adaptation strategy, where already through the Community Advisory Hui, community workshops, as well as interdepartmental workshops, you know, we are keying in on 5 climate hazards, top climate hazards of concern, which raise to the surface from just research in the literature, engaging with community and understanding what they're concerned about, but then also the departments in terms of the kinds of services that we provide and hope to continue to provide into the future, as well as our own infrastructure and assets, and understanding that risk is really this function of likelihood and consequence. And you know, some of you have chimed in on those earlier phases of that project. So we really are keying in on sea level rise and coastal erosion rose to the top, closely followed by increasing temperatures, and primarily because of the likelihood. I mean, the direct linkage between the climate science and those 2 hazards of concern are the probability is better known in terms of crossing thresholds into the near future and beyond. And then sort of in 3, 4, and 5, very closely aligned included rain bombs, which we know are consequential in those geographies where they happen, but just the predictability is challenging, and even the forecasting is very challenging. And then drought followed closely behind that, and then sort of the triple threat from hurricanes, which from the climate change brief, we know that the risk is increasing, not necessarily because of more storms per se, but because of the changing tracks as a result of increasing ocean and air temperatures. So with that climate risk assessment, as we continue to engage, especially as we look at different places around the island. Some of the framing questions were about impacts to people in a place or the environment of that place directly in line with today's presentation even. And then also thinking about the consequences for the economy of the island. There's probably a lot more that we need to think about. I'd be interested in any support around heat and temperatures. I think that's a topic that we really haven't broached at state or county levels in as much sort of earnest as some of the sea level rise discussions, and a better understanding on like the kinds of things that could potentially mitigate or buffer us against increasing temperature through time. We do have the community heat assessment that we did in 2019. We're looking for more ways to bring more forecasting and scenarios potentially. Hopefully we can share some information at a next meeting. But I think, you know, across the board, not just thinking about like things like canopy and surfaces and albedo and reflectance, right, as strategies, but understanding that land change is still happening. We still have a lot of growth areas around the island, and how do we perhaps learn better than some of our development patterns in the past to facilitate these places to be not just affordable but comfortable into the future. Yeah, so I think temperature is an interesting one. Heat stress across economic consequences, but also health and livelihood. That'd be something that we'd be interested in exploring with the commission. Perhaps some more targeted questions that could support that subject. That's just one idea, and I would certainly like to see more follow-up from today's presentation and some of the research that, you know, both in your day jobs, I suppose, across the natural systems, both their current value and potential future value, and understanding those as inputs into how we make decisions. I know McKenna and Victoria, you've both engaged in that subject, thinking about watersheds and other elements. There's probably also, you know, I haven't thought about it. You put me on the spot, but there's definitely a lot more as we have our monthly One Water panel meetings. There might be things that quickly surface from some of that ongoing engagement. Yeah.
For that, Matt, that was a comprehensive list of things to look at. I also think that it's strategic to only, if we're going to like pre-plan a couple of meetings, however Chip and Rosie choose to do it. I find that it was helpful to not pack the agendas too far out, to be more nimble and able to respond to different policies at the state and city level as they arise, or climate events that may occur, or things that it helps to be nimble to be able to respond and include it in meetings.
Yeah,
so
and not losing sight of the climate action stuff as we start to develop some of the near-term priorities. Again, there might be things that I can come back at a future meeting in terms of, you know, questions that we still have in terms of the research to inform decision making and mechanisms for implementing any of the priorities.
So kind of on that topic, Matt, one of the things that I've seen as kind of a strength of the commission is being able to start discussions with different groups and organizations that might have that you might have not been connected with otherwise, and to have them present and bring some different viewpoints and case studies from different regions, things like that. Are there any specific organizations that you'd like us to reach out to, or even sectors of society that you think have not been well represented, or you haven't been able to include in a way, in an equitable way, that in these discussions about resiliency and climate, that you'd like us to have to try and reach out to have representation?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. We've greatly benefited from the agenda that you have set up in the past, you know, whether it's from some of those early financial institutions bringing and elevating the discussion of risk, or even today's presentation. I think there's probably a lot more that we could do in terms of learning from the existing community-based stewardship or environmental or education-based groups. The challenge is they're always so busy doing the great work that these kinds of convenings feel like additional and perhaps not necessarily their priority focus. But this is not sort of to pick and choose favorites, but groups like Malama Learning Center, finding different sort of Malka groups, Makai groups, even learning from them, potentially the pros and cons of engaging with the city. We would benefit from those kinds of discussions, especially as we hope to empower and just sort of cut loose those interested parties and community volunteers on like finding these opportunities to do potential future green infrastructure things right outside their door, right? Not necessarily having to go to another ahupua'a or have the resources or benefits to get up Malka. What are the things that we can do right outside our door in our own neighborhoods? I think that's part of an ongoing discussion as we look at our own community forestry practices or some of the continued discussions around the stormwater utility and what that might mean for future kinds of green stormwater practices, both on public and private lands into the future. So it's a good discussion to start priming as the successful models in other cities and jurisdictions are community-based volunteer models to facilitate doing works, but also to do some of the maintenance and early establishment of those kinds of vegetative practices. So I'd be happy to work with maybe vice chair to bridge us through the potential transition with the commission, just to maybe make a short list to think through who might be great voices to bring to that kind of a discussion.
That sounds great, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Just out of, so this might be out of my ignorance, does the city collaborate with the invasive species councils, the various ones on different islands already, or is that?
I wouldn't know directly, but I'm sure through our Board of Water Supply, who is a direct funder and partner for some of the watershed management work, presumably there's engagement with DLNR DOFA as well as the Oahu Invasive Species Council. So that's perhaps an assumption, and we could look into that.
Great. Are there any other, I feel like we just got another year of meetings and ideas for agendas from Matt's comments, but are there other comments from the commissioners on topics of interest or thoughts about what Director Gonser brought up?
Hi, this is Rosie. I don't have specific topics, but what I would just request is that when we are able to have meetings in person, that we really prioritize the notion of having those meetings in community again, and having them outside of the urban core so that we can have a broad demographic participate in these meetings.
Yep, very much agree, Rosie. Thanks for that comment. And that kind of relates back to, or directly relates back to the equity pledge that we all committed to when we released the climate and equity and adaptation guidance document back in December, I believe, which included a pledge that we would hold these meetings at various times and in diverse communities around the island, which obviously we have not been able to do this past year due to the pandemic and the Zoom, the virtual meetings. But yes, I'm definitely interested in getting back to that. Is there any update from the city on when or kind of when in-person commission meetings would be able to start again?
I don't have any specific updates that I could offer at this time. Obviously, we're following closely some of the governor's thresholds for a whole variety of things, and any moves in terms of the city's emergency proclamations or tier system are ultimately approved by the governor.
I figured, just thought I would ask. Okay, are there any more comments from commissioners on topics for the next year?
I just want to echo, like, particularly very much agree with Rosie's comment for when we can be in person again, but then also the importance of this as a venue to start conversations and to bring in information. I think that is one of the important roles that this commission has and can play. So just to emphasize that.
McKenna. Right, if there aren't any more comments from commissioners, I will open it up to public comment on this agenda item.
Oh, I had one additional thought, which is not only opening it up in terms of our location, but another demographic would be age. And I think that, you know, in the past election cycle, we saw very much a desire to bring in youth voices. And while it would be very difficult to, you know, add on a commission seat, I would very much like to invite, you know, youth climate voices to contribute to this conversation.
Thanks, Rosie.
If I may, Chair, I don't know the timing of it, but through last year's election, there was an approval for the establishment of a youth commission. That work is still underway, so that, you know, some kind of invitation or cross meeting, you know, that could be a great opportunity at a later date.
Right. And that's a youth commission more generally, not specifically around climate or resilience.
Correct.
All right, opening it back up to public comment on this agenda item. Don't think I'm seeing anything. Okay, if there are no more comments on this agenda item for the potential focus areas of work for the next calendar year, let's move on to the next item, which is public input for matters not on the agenda. So opening up the floor, please drop your name in chat or raise your hand on Zoom, or turn on your video and raise your hand if you have any non-agenda related input that you'd like to offer. Don't think I'm seeing anything. Haley, is there anything on the Facebook feed?
Nothing on Facebook.
Okay. Then I will move on to the next agenda item, which is announcements. Are there any announcements from the commissioners? McKenna?
This is Rachel Hahn's last meeting with us in her role as a research assistant. And so I just wanted to just thank you, Rachel, for all of your efforts. So much appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Oh, I didn't realize this was your last meeting with us. Yeah, thank you so much for all your work and being involved.
McKenna, I actually thought that I ended July 31st. So.
Do we have one more meeting? Okay.
So, yeah.
Never mind. I retract my announcement. So my announcement is that Rachel Hahn will be concluding her year of this fellowship shortly. And maybe there is one more meeting scheduled before that happens. I didn't think there was, but maybe there is. So, okay.
That's our next agenda item. But Rachel, that doesn't mean we still can't appreciate all the help that you've given us over the past year. So yes. Thank you. And again, thank you to Haley for filling in and taking on these duties over the last year as well. Any other announcements? More premature announcements? I'll make not really an announcement, but McKenna, thank you for serving in this role for 2 years. After a year of doing it, I'm very grateful to you for doing it for 2 years. All right, if there are no other announcements, are there any announcements from the public? We're losing people. People are dropping off. All right, if there's nothing else, then, oh, whoops, I skipped over the tentative next meeting date, which I don't think we have. Rachel, is that correct?
No, it's July 13th at 9 a.m.
All right, there we go. July 13th at 9 a.m.
Tuesday.
Great. All right, so we'll see everyone back then, and that will hopefully be when Chip returns and officially accepts us voting him in as chair for the next year. And so with that, congratulations to Dr. Rosie Alagada for staying on another year as vice chair. And I look forward to the next year of meetings that and outputs that you and Chip help facilitate with all of our input. If there's nothing else, then the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Vicki, for your leadership.
Thank you.
Great
Vicky.
job.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Aloha, everybody.